Doug Stanton discusses his new book, The Odyssey of Echo Company, the 1968 Tet Offensive and the Epic Battle to Survive the Vietnam War.
My name is Doug Stanton. It's true. I just came from Portage by Grand Rapids via Traverse City, Michigan, where I grew up and where I live and work as a writer. It's nice to see old friends and family. Thank you. In every city in Michigan, I have some family members. I'm always assured of an audience that way. Yeah, and it's true. I've been in Denver and Tampa and lots of places since this book came out. And I want to talk tonight about, as said in the introduction, about Vietnam. I want to try to change the way you think about Vietnam and maybe the way you talk about it in your own life and your own community. I also feel very privileged to stand here and to be able to do that. I am a historian, I guess you could say, but I'm really a storyteller. And a story can bind a community, it can bring us together, and it can make sense out of chaos, sense out of nonsense. And what I did in this book, I think, is just really listen. And so in our Q&A portion tonight, we can perhaps go into some of our own experiences of listening in our own community to veterans, especially from the Vietnam era, also but from Iraq and Afghanistan. Who in the audience was in Vietnam as a soldier? Anyone? Oh, all right. Who, besides that, has family members who were in Vietnam as soldier? Right. How about Iraq or Afghanistan? Anyone? Yeah, me too. Okay, so we have a good blend in this audience of that experience of what it's like to have a veteran in our midst. 50 years ago, 75 years ago, that wouldn't have been such an odd question, but it is a more unusual one today. I am going to start with a reading from this book, which introduces one of our main people. He's not really a character, he's a real person. His name is Stan Parker from Gary, Indiana, the son of an iron worker. I met him in Afghanistan. How did I meet Stan Parker in Afghanistan in 2005? I was researching a second book called Horse Soldiers. And come on in, there's room, hi. More family members, see, I told you. I was researching my second book, Horse Soldiers, and getting into a helicopter at Bagram Airfield. And we were taking off on a beautiful sunny day and going to fly to the Pakistani border, where I was going to get off and live with a Special Forces camp for a week to do some research. And I was very excited about this, but also nervous, as you can imagine. And however, the older soldier from the back of the helicopter came forward and said, "Did you write this book called In Harm's Way," which was about the USS Indianapolis? And I said, "Yes, I did. I see that story as a survival story about young, ordinary Americans doing something extraordinary. What I think I write about is when we face those existential moments when we have to make a hard decision at the hardest moment. That's what I'd like to write about. That moment wherein our sense of humanity blossoms or it doesn't. And as a writer, you can use that as a lens to really focus in on our condition, our commonalities. So while these are books about war, they're really about being people. It's about being you and me, your uncle, your brother, your grandfather, set against the backdrop of a war. So I think Stan Parker saw that because he said, "Would you write about Vietnam?" I said, "Well, I don't know, Stan. Number one, I'm kind of flying over Afghanistan right now. I'm paying attention to that." He was in full kit. He's early, about 60, had his M4. He was command sergeant major at SOCOM. He'd been in Somalia, Panama, Europe, Afghanistan, all kinds of battles and firefights. But the one thing he wanted to talk about that day was Vietnam. And I filed that away. I said, "I don't think I can write about this right now, Stan. I don't think, number one, anyone will buy it, because we're surrounded by war, and two, I don't know if you're really ready to talk about it. So I was waiting for a couple of things to happen. It makes me sound smarter than I really am, but in retrospect, per the introduction, we were waiting for this generation to turn 70, I think. Why? Because men take a long time to grow up, and I think at about the age of 70, they begin to open up and lighten up. And that was true with the World War II generation in my experience with In Harm's Way. And Tom Brokaw discovered that. He gave me a nice blurb. You know, when he discovered the, quote, greatest generation, it was because at his age and his life, he asked those 70-year-olds to talk, and they did. I call this Vietnam generation the forgotten generation because they forgot, and then we forgot to ask after a while about what they'd lived through. So what you have behind the covers of this book is, I think, America's secret story about what a generation experienced in our most calamitous moment. And it's really our unfinished American narrative when it comes to combat. You know, it's gender, race, and Vietnam remain, among other things that float in and out of that intersection, really difficult things to talk about in America. And I think with the Ken Burns documentary, and I think with this generation becoming 70, and I think with the 50th anniversary of all things Vietnam this year, we're at an inflection point where perhaps a book like this helps open the door. I hope you slide this book across the kitchen table, and you might walk away and go pour another cup of coffee, and you say, by the way, were you there? And a book is a good excuse, a good doorway into a new conversation about something previously unexplored. So that's the preamble of the book, and of course it is about the Tet Offensive, and it's about these other things, but in the end, I separate the war from the soldier, and I wanted to just stand and listen to these guys tell me this story and have you feel what it felt like. I was in Raleigh last week, and I heard what it felt like from a Fortune 500 CEO, now retired, who said, I learned early on in my boardroom experience never to say the words Vietnam, which is very shocking. I mean, this journey of this book and the journey I think we could go on as a community, and really pausing just for a moment to look back at Vietnam as we look forward at Iraq and Afghanistan, has been filled with those kinds of surprises. Think about that for a moment. You have a secret, and it's involved with perhaps one of the most terrifying yet joyous experiences of your life, and you can't tell anybody about it because somehow you'll be blackballed for it by your peers. Think of all the conversations we've not had in America because we've been holding that secret off to the side. Think of Uncle Charlie at the family reunion, whom everyone says, hey, he was in Vietnam, right? Well, yeah, but he doesn't talk about it, so we won't go there. But think of all the times Uncle Charlie has sat at that reunion thinking, why in the hell won't anyone ask me about Vietnam? Years and years later. And he is asking that question. That's sad to me, and we can fix that. I don't know what will happen when we do fix it. I don't pretend to have those answers, but it just doesn't seem humane. And so in the end, book is tough, it's dramatic, I think it's gritty, it's emotional, but in the end it's about being humane in an inhumane environment. He's brought all his own reading material in case, hi sir, welcome. So I want to just set this up. I'll read a few passages to give you a flavor of this, and then I want to really hear from you. You can ask me questions, and I know some of you have some of your experiences yourself concerning what we call the Vietnam War. But one of the things I want us to be aware of is how this is a different America. Now, you're probably thinking, of course it was. It was 1967, 68, Robert Kennedy is killed, Martin Luther King is killed, the Democratic Convention happens, all these things happen. But I'm talking about 65 and 66, before the cusp, what we call really the beginning of the 60s. That still is really, to me, the era of World War II. And I say that because Stan Parker is at the kitchen table in Gary, Indiana, and his father has come home only 21 years earlier from World War II. Right. And there are 3 channels. There's no social media. So his world is infused with a very different set of concerns. They weren't the concerns of what was going to happen in '67 with race and other social unrest and protests. But that was not Stan's doing. That is the world in which he was raised, in which he enlisted into the Army. He quickly becomes a more world-weary person in the process of my grandniece. So she doesn't. Your family is always your toughest critic. So it's 2017. 9/11 has happened only 16 years ago. So really, and that event feels like it's with us every day, doesn't it? I mean, in some way, it affects us politically, socially, and creatively. In the same way, I'm trying to argue that World War II was infusing Stan Parker's young adolescence and early adult life with the decisions he was making. So here's an example of just who this fellow is shortly after enlistment in 1966, just to paint a picture, and then we'll jump more into the middle of the war, and we can compare and contrast that. His mother has died. She's a wonderful woman, apparently, and I think that this book is really about, in many ways, his parents. You're really reading a biography of this young man. Lest you think it's all about bullets and bombs, you're really following him from Gary through his life and so on. And here he is. It's another world. He needs time off from his training at Fort Huachuca in Arizona, where he's a young private, and he can't get it. He's gone to Texas for the funeral, and this is how he responds to this problem. In order to attend the funeral, Stan realizes he has to extend his leave. He phones his company commander, expecting to fix the problem quickly, but the CO doesn't take long to think it over. No, he says, and if you're not back here, Parker, you're AWOL. And by the way, your ass will be grass, and I'll be the lawn mower. Well, Stan thinks, that's clever, huh? He pleads for more time, believing that reason will win here. His request is denied. What I love about that is that he's told no, but in a childlike way, he thinks, well, there's got to be a way around this, right? He tries thinking the problem through, believing that no matter the circumstance, there's a solution. He walks into the living room, the floor covered with a braided rug, its walls bearing pictures of generations of Parkers, and he sits down next to his father. A news story on the TV catches Stan's eye. The report is that Lyndon Johnson will be at his Texas ranch for the Thanksgiving holiday. Stan has an idea. A crazy one, he thinks, but what does he have to lose? He picks up the phone in the hallway and dials the operator on the local party line. The operator's name is Sarah, and the Parker family has known her for as long as Stan can remember. The party line connects the Parker household to all other houses in Queen City and to the rest of the world. Anyone remember a party line? Yeah? It's like it would just drive my kids crazy to know that someone would be picking up the phone now and listening into what you're saying. But counterintuitively, this is what's going to connect Stan with the rest of the world. Why? Stan Parker, says Sarah, hearing Stan's voice. How are you? Well, I'm fine, Sarah. I'm in Queen City. Well, I was sorry to hear about your mother. That's kind of why I'm calling, Stan says. Sarah asks what he means. Well, I have a strange request. My company commander won't let me stay in Texas for the funeral, and I need to be here for my dad. You're kidding me. They won't let you stay? No, ma'am. And I saw on TV news that the president's in Texas, and I'm in Texas, and well, I thought I might talk to him. The LBJ Ranch in Johnson City sits about 400 miles southwest near Austin. Sarah says after a moment she doesn't see why she can't at least try to connect him. You don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. Several minutes later, the phone rings. Stan, Sarah says, you're on with the LBJ Ranch in Johnson City. Stan pauses. Is this really working? A man on the other end asks him what he can do for him. Stan stumbles a bit, and then he says, hi, yes, this is Private Stan Parker of the U.S. Army. May I please speak with the president? The voice at the other end seems amused. Stan will later learn this is a military aide. Well, perhaps I can help, son. Tell me what you'd like to discuss. Well, Stan explains how his mother has died and that he'd broken her heart when he, Stan, had signed up for the Army after high school graduation. And now he wants to give her a proper burial, but he can't. His company commander has forbidden him the time he needs. There's a silence on the other end of the phone. Stan figures the person is absorbing this important news. And everything you're telling me is true, is that correct? Yes, sir, it is. Okay, he says after a minute, you stay on this line. Sarah, the aide says, I'm going to give you a number. It's unlisted, and I want you to tell them that this call has been directed from the LBJ Ranch. Why, yes, sir, thank you. Now, Private Parker, do not hang up. No, sir, I won't. The aide hangs up, and Sarah dials the number saying, Stanley, I'm connecting you now. After a few rings, a woman's voice is on the line. Sarah says, yes, this call has been referred to you by the LBJ Ranch in Johnson City, Texas. Almost immediately, a male voice picks up. This is Robert McNamara speaking. How can I help you? Stan is floored. He's talking with the Secretary of Defense of the United States of America. He presses on quickly with his story about his mother's funeral, and Mr. McNamara listens and seems to express shock at the company commander's refusal to extend his leave. He tells Stan that he'll take care of things, and as unexpectedly as it began, the phone call ends. The secretary remains true to his promise. The following day, when Stan calls Fort Huachuca again, he learns his leave has been extended. He also learns that the U.S. military will pay for his return flight and even provide a military escort from Chicago to Arizona. Upon arriving at the base, his escort, an Army colonel, strides crisply into the CO's office, who looks up in surprise. I've been sent from the Secretary of Defense to bring Private Stan Parker back to your command. He's been at his mother's funeral, and he is, I repeat, not AWOL. The CO turns completely white. Stan thinks the man is going to have a stroke. The colonel says goodbye and strides out the door. Stan considers saying something clever, but he thinks better of this. So, this is one of our guys. He is young. He'll be 20 when the Tet happens in January of '68. And he is soon to join nearly 500,000 other young American men in Afghanistan for 1968, which will become the year's bloodiest war, during which more than 16,000 people will be killed from America. So quickly we go from this, I can solve this kind of mindset to I had better solve this or I will never make it home. And I often, gathering with different members of this reconnaissance platoon, which is broken into squads, so we're really following squads here of a platoon of a company, E-Company, of the 101st Airborne Division. We gathered squads together in California and talking to them on the phone, I often imagined their boot coming out of the helicopter and that first step onto the skid and then down into the grass and walking forward. And I imagined the kind of enthusiasm with which they entered into this country in this war. And quickly, those steps do not become steps further into combat, but each step forward becomes a step back home. So even though we must walk and walk today, what we're really walking is walking back home. And that's why the book is titled The Odyssey of Echo Company, because in a very large and real way, this is a book about coming home. In fact, I wanted to title it Coming Home. I couldn't convince my publisher of that. And I think if the book has any value in a community, it may aid in that homecoming by perhaps bridging the chasm between that experience and here we are today, our experience today, where we still carry, some of us, this story around. I want to move ahead now in time just to 5 weeks after 6 weeks after their entrance into Vietnam. So this earlier section with the Johnson Ranch takes its place when he's in his training in the Army. The 101st Airborne, this particular brigade, entered in December of '67, and they land on a dusty outpost in I Corps. Anyone in I Corps in this room? Okay. Were you in the 101st? Yes, sir. Oh, you were. In this action or during?
It was with the 3rd and the 506. We weren't attached to the division. We were all volunteers and trained for 7 months.
In Fort Campbell?
At Fort Campbell.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating.
Two jump schedules and stuff.
Well, thank you for being here. I'm sorry, your name, sir? John Cologne took part in what really was one of the most massive airlifts of personnel and material. Some 10,000 troops were moved over to I Corps in northern Vietnam.
We went by boat.
You took the boat?
From San Francisco.
Wow.
Pretty much on the boat.
I knew there were boats, but these guys lifted off from Fort Campbell, one sortie after another. Why? Because we can go over this in the Q&A, because I'd like to actually have you, I'm sure the audience would love to hear you talk. Have you spoken before publicly in any way? Great. All right. Good. You can encourage others to do that. How to set the scene. You don't need to know a lot about the political situation of Vietnam. You may be aware of in the U.S., but what you do need to know is that the war has, according to President Johnson and General Westmoreland and others, even Hubert Humphrey, that the war has been going reasonably okay. The body count, remember the body count on television? It's a very complex way to measure success in war, and we can talk about that, but the war has been moving along. Why are we there? Stan thinks he's there to fight communism. He's there to help the South Vietnamese protect their own homeland from an incursion of communist rule. There's a much longer, and I touch about it in the book, a much longer history that goes back to 1945 and before that in the 19th century with the French, with Ho Chi Minh and so on. And we can debate in the Q&A about whether or not what would have happened had the war been prosecuted differently. I have been back to Vietnam with Stan Parker, and it is a hustling, bustling, capitalist place that you would swear was Midtown Manhattan if you didn't know it was a communist country. They are there to stop the North Vietnamese from coming into the South over the DMZ. There's some chatter on the intelligence network that something is coming around the Tet Lunar New Year, which is a time of celebration with families. They arrive at LZ Jane, which is a dusty outcropping. You'll see it in some video later. And that night, the Tet Offensive commences. Some 100,000 troops from around the country of South Vietnam attack simultaneously or nearly simultaneously. Executed with pretty swift precision. And for Americans back in their living rooms, they're trying to square this circle. How can the president and the general say one thing and then the images of the embassy in Saigon being attacked by guerrilla fighters, how can that be happening too? How can we hold both of these images in mind at once? And this, I think, is a point where America begins to cleave left and right and hawk and dove, because we have a very clear instance where our leaders are telling us one thing and something else is happening. So the guys on the ground don't necessarily know this. What they know is that they're under swift attack. So the book covers really then the aftermath of that attack, during which the North Vietnamese are basically pushed back tactically, and the Viet Cong are somewhat crushed. They don't ever really recover from the counterattack. You know, do we all know what we mean by Viet Cong or Viet Minh? They're the guerrilla fighters, somewhat working with the conventional troops of the North Vietnamese. Their MO was always to, as in Afghanistan, dodge out, have a fight, and then pull back. Never stand and slug it out with a superior force because you're going to lose. But during the Tet, they were forced to do that with the MVA. And so on the ground, you look at that cover, they think after a while that they don't know if they're winning, but they're not losing in the way that we perceive it back in the States, at least in my own reporting, because there's a lot of killing going on. And how do we measure success? The body count. And they still begin to wonder, however, what are we fighting for? You know, what's really our objective? And this moment of moral complexity is where we're going to pick up with Stan Parker here. And I just want to now dive ahead. It's the same young man from Gary, Indiana, but this is now his experience. Stan Parker is walking in a gray drizzle with Al Dove and Brian Riley, and he's wrapped in a clear plastic shower curtain. They've torn these down from the shower stalls at the nearby schoolhouse. Their weapons poke through a part in the curtains, and they make a strange sight, like translucent beasts. Up ahead, Stan sees a little girl standing in the middle of the road, watching the groups advance. She looks scared, filthy, and very alone. As he gets closer, he sees she's also very young, maybe 6 or 7. Her hair is tangled and her face is dirty, and it's streaked with tears. Stan takes off the shower curtain and he offers it to her. She doesn't move, so he wraps it around her, but it's too long and bunches around her bare feet. So he takes his knife and hacks away at the extra length to shorten it. She doesn't say anything. She does not ask for anything, nor does she stand back and shy away. She stands there looking at him, mute, impassive, courageous. Stan suddenly feels the need to do something for her, but he simply stares at her in his confused, sleep-deprived state. He looks and looks at her. And then he has what he can only describe later as an epiphany, an awakening. He's able to see the whole lousy war through her eyes, the shooting, the killing. Images roll back and forth over her face, and he watches them pass before them, a movie of who he is, who he was, who he's becoming. An animal, a killer. A young man who is filled with hatred, as President Johnson had predicted all men would become in war. But he has this overwhelming desire to make the girl safe. But he doesn't know how. He wants to give her something, clean clothes, food, a future. He has nothing to give her except his attention. Then he remembers he has a can of peaches in the canvas bag on his chest where he stores his Claymore mines. He pulls out the heavy can of fruit and bends down and offers it to her. The can is large in her dirty hands, which sags under its weight. "It's okay," he tells her. "Take it, go away." And he makes a shooing gesture with his hand. He would like someone to come and take care of her. He would like to come back to Vietnam as another kind of person and be able to offer her some peace and attention and safety. It's quiet between the two of them, punctuated by the rustle of the shower curtain wrapped around her thin shoulders. She just stares at the peaches and then back at Stan as if asking him what she should do with this. It's then he realizes he's been left behind by the rest of the patrol. Al Dove and Brian Riley, already far ahead, are calling to him, "Come on, man, we got to get out of here, let's go." He finally turns from the girl, touches her gently on the head, and says, "Goodbye." And then he runs to catch up. He rounds a corner and he sees them up ahead. A few seconds after that, he hears gunshots behind him. Oh no, he thinks, not the girl. He wheels around and runs. He turns the corner and there she is, a tiny clump no bigger than a pile of rags in the street. Looking down the road, he sees 4 MVA soldiers fleeing among the buildings. He levels his weapon and fires at them, but he misses and curses himself. How could he miss them when he'd killed so many men before? Stan runs up to the girl, looks at her, and drops to his knees, crying. Why, oh why, oh why, he wonders. But he knows why. Because he's a bad person. Because he's an American soldier. Because he's a man filled with madness. He looks down at her, still holding the peaches, her hand tightened in spasm around the can. Her fingers are incredibly slender. Why did he give her the can of peaches? He would love more than anything to reach back through time and take them back. She's dead because she accepted the Americans' peaches. The irony is, if he'd had no compassion for her, if he'd ignored her, she'd still be alive. He might as well aimed his rifle at her and pulled the trigger. Stan looks up at the sky, shuddering, a hoarse cry emptying from his stomach, more animal than human. The other guys come running up to him, and they stop when they see him. They're unsure what to do. They look at him. They start circling as he rocks back and forth in the street. Riley walks up and says, "Hey, we got to get out of here. Let's radio this in and go." Stan nods and reaches over and picks up the girl and cradles her. He thankfully figures that she died instantly. He walks with her across the street to an empty building. It's been bombed, but the front wall is standing, and he thinks she'll be safe there. Next door is an apartment building that's been bombed and is empty too. Riley and Dove want to leave the street, but he refuses. He tells them he will not leave there without the girl, or he won't leave the girl there alone. He wants to sit across the street in the safety of another building as a hidey hole and wait to see who comes by. Maybe the men who shot her, or some of their friends, or maybe her family, or someone who knows her, but either way, he can't leave her like this in an empty building alongside an empty road as twilight falls. The other guys try to convince him otherwise. He sets up an ambush position with his M16 trained on the building where she lies in state. Through the long night, which is cold and raining, he thinks he hears footfalls in the dark, the steps of the enemy, but nothing happens. And as the sun rises, he gets up, feeling sore, and stretches. He has that feeling, worn out, rinsed out after great strain, as if the terror of the past days had burned away his nerve endings. He looks, and across the road he sees the rats. They're crawling all over the girl. He can hear their scratching, and he puts it all together. Oh, God, no, he thinks. But real calm, he lifts his rifle to his cheek, and he takes aim and fires. One of the rats goes flying backward and away from the girl, and he aims again, careful to guide the round away from her, and fires. Another rat cartwheels from her slight frame. He starts firing more rapidly, knocking the rats down, and he keeps firing even after the last one is dead, getting more excited, the nerve endings coming back to life, as if sprouting through his skin. He shot them all, every one, at least several dozen, but he says over to his shoulder to Riley, calm and spooky, more ammo. And Riley, without objecting, hands him another magazine, 19 more bullets, and Stan jams the mag up in the receiver and charges the weapon and begins firing some more. Dove and Riley quietly tell him, "It's okay, you did good." Stan realizes he's gone berserk. After a few moments, he gets up and walks across the road to the girl and looks at her. He can barely stand it, looking at her. The ugly thing he's wrought by his attempt at kindness. She is still holding the can of peaches in her tiny hand. The memory of that story Stan Parker carried with him his entire life, and that was on his mind when we were in the helicopter. And now, having met him in 2005 and these many years, gotten to know him and the platoon, that is why he reached out to me. And that is why he would reach out to any of us to tell that story. I happened to be the guy standing in the ramp of the helicopter who looked like he might write a book. And when I say this book is an active witness, it is an active witness for me to listen to that story. That's the easy part, of course. But I think I try to often imagine the courage that it took Stan to reach out to me, a stranger, to say, would you listen? Would you listen? And then to also recount that story. He felt very, very, very bad about that, and still does. And so it's in the book. It's there, and I think it forms a collage of emotions that we come through on this journey of the book, which tends towards the light at the end, and it makes the end sweeter in a way, because the book ends with a smile, given all that we go through. We don't get closure much when we talk about something like Vietnam, and that can be a trite phrase, but we do, in a sense, get it in this book. And I think what we can do now is maybe go to some of the images of reporting the book, some of the images of Stan Parker and Tom Souls, his buddy, and we'll explore what I mean by that sense of closure on this journey. I do want to point out that while Stan is featured in the book, and he did reach out to me 12 years ago, the platoon had many men in it, and the company had many men in it, and the division had many men in it, and all of them are worthy of their own book. And so, but I have to say that, you know, the only operating instructions for a book like this is that you try to, you know, it has to stand for, I hope it stands for the experience of a lot of people, while at the same time creating room for individual men and women to have their own story told. So let's, this is not a PowerPoint. Yeah. But it does start with some pictures, and then it moves into some video I shot. And actually, I've learned I've shown this a couple of times. Everything you see was not, it was not planned. This video is going to be, it's going to go somewhere, and it was completely unplanned. Just keep that in mind. And then the black and white photos and the color photos you see of contemporary Vietnam include Stan Parker standing in places where he was either shot or fought. And he, because I met him when he was still in the Army, he was a command sergeant major at Special Operations Command. Basically, he's a master record keeper and a guy who keeps the trains running on time. And so when we prepared for this trip, we got after-action reports during the relevant time periods and grid maps. And Stan actually, for the first time, after surviving all of this combat around the world, the first time he kind of brought it home and charted his own journey. And I watched him at his kitchen table, reading the report. Okay, and he, you know, teaching me how to read a grid map, you know, YD, and then you go down a couple squares. It's really a lot of fun, actually. And wow, and so the after-action reports say at 0300, Tiger 02 moves to location, YD grid coordinate, extract by helo at 1400s, it's an hour later. And so, and giving grid coordinates. So what he was doing is replacing this stuff, and he, for 11 hours, he sat at the kitchen table and just was marking it. And the whole pass bloomed to life. That's what I mean by the power of story to make sense out of nonsense. Because one of the things I want to stress for you as you meet Vietnam veterans is the chaotic nature of this experience. John? Yeah. That you may speak to, caused by the helicopter assault. So we could be a platoon in here. I won't count right now, but or plus. So all of us are going to get on a helicopter here, or several, Hueys, and we're going to fly downtown, and we're going to, some people are going to go to South Campus and East Campus, and our job is to look around. We're the reconnaissance platoon of E Company. We're going to radio back to the library and say, everything's fine here. No, we have some problems over here. The other line companies, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta, will then come in and assist or do whatever needs to be done. We might do that for 2 hours. It might be a terrifying 2 hours. Get back on a helicopter, come back to the library, eat a greasy can of beans out of a sea ration can, and then maybe a couple hours later fly to North Campus and do that again. Might do that 3 times in a day, 350 days in a row, minus your leave to Australia or something like that. We're not sleeping. None of us in this room has slept more than 2 or 3 hours in 3-4 weeks. We have no sleeping bag. We have no tent. we had nothing except each other and the clothes we're wearing on our back. And so when Stan is at the kitchen table, essentially reassembling his memories, the physicality of the place was so important. And I would recommend that to any of you to, that, we live in a physical world filled with abstract ideas. And to anchor these experiences was an important part of this journey back. So you'll see him standing in different places that we first found on these grid maps in his home in Colorado. So go ahead and press play, and then we'll watch and then talk. This is me walking up the draw. We're on January 30th, about 4 a.m. The Tet Offensive commenced here at LZ Jane, outside the village of Hai Lang. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese were running up this hill towards these positions.
We were right over here, right up here, over here. And they came up that draw. Let's see.
Hồi này gọi là tiểu đoàn kỳ binh bay.
Who are you? I say, you are me, American soldiers, at this place.
This was our
Kỳ binh bay.
You say, infantry, is it?
Yeah.
Infantry? Paint the color to appear at night time and kill one by one.
Yeah.
And when you found them here, you came and you kill them. So
Yeah.
they had to be killed all.
Yeah. Yeah. If they
He knew that. He knew the reason why
Right.
you come here.
right,
He knew the
if
reason.
they hadn't have shot him, we would have not known they were here. We would have not come. You know.
Người về chẳng máy bay bị thương.
Says you were wounded, and it was why the American soldiers tried to burn things to attack back to
vengeance.
the local soldiers.
Tinkle and High Note both got shot right here. It was a little further back than that, probably maybe only 25 meters. And finally, I was able to raise up and shoot the wall across this road and into that. And there was a bunker there. It was attached to a house. There was a thatch hut, and the bunker was part of it. And it went into the bunker and blew up. And that's where I got up and went over there. And as I finished it off, the other NVA soldier come running over that way. He ran right up beside me. He thought I was one of him, and I thought he was one of my guys. Man, this is great. I tell you what, my day has been made. Man.
So I remember I said, I promised you that it was unplanned. That moment happened, and it forms the, it's in the book. It was just like watching two worlds knit together, because that gentleman, Mr. Sin, had long remembered this battle, picked the tiniest town in Michigan nearby, and that's where we were, and then reduce it again to even us. We were in the middle of nowhere. And he had been blown out of his own building by Stan Parker's rocket. He pulled us over and took us to the side, and about this high there was some brush that he cleared away, and there stood it was either concrete or some kind of hard surfaced pillar, but he said this is a monument to that battle on February 18th of 1968. And it was also in recognition of the American soldiers who had died there. Stan Parker's eyes grew very wide, because he realized that the one person who had remembered this as much as him was his enemy. And that photograph of Mr. Sin holding out his palm is when he is drawing with a ballpoint pen on his own hand corrections to Stan's own timeline of the battle, which is how they began to realize that they were both been in the same place. And that literally Stan's life is in the palm of his enemy's hand. And if you were to go off the edge of that, you would cross the ocean and cross America and cross the Rockies and end up at that kitchen table where he sat so many days trying to figure out what happened. And it all came back, though, into the square inches of that man's hand. And as I sat there, and you saw the look on their faces, correct? Very genuine. There was Mr. Sin. They both were in this moment. And so as a reporter, and my wife Ann Stanton and my brother-in-law Tony taking pictures, and I'm just shooting with a little camera, I didn't realize at the time, but when I came home I realized, if they can do this, why can't we, right? If the two people who tried to kill each other the most can stand back and reach some sense of resolution, it doesn't mean we have world peace. It doesn't mean we've solved all their problems. But at least for the moment, as I'm urging you to do with this book, is they have just accepted and acknowledged it, nodded at the experience. And so that leaves us in America wondering, well, what is our next move? And I think our next move is something like theirs, which is also ultimately the move forward. And that ends the book. I don't know what would have happened had that scene not happened, because it changed so many things in Stan's life. And he said he felt like the weight of the world was lifted off his shoulders. A lot of things were coming up in his, we would talk. One of the things he said after he watched this video was, he goes, I'm so glad that I didn't kill Mr. Sin. And I'm so glad he didn't kill me, because if we were both dead, we could never have had this reunion, which is an obvious thing to say, but what he meant was the joy that he felt was so piercing and cleansing that he was glad, and I was glad too. And so Horse Soldiers is about that certain part of the U.S. Army that we don't know much about, and it's been turned into a movie with Chris Hemsworth and Michael Shannon called 12 Strong. And so if you want, we can just watch it. And I've never really seen it on a large screen like this, only on my phone. So let's, and it's only 2.5 minutes long, and then I'll be in the back signing books or taking more questions if you want. So here we go.
You taking me to school again?
Uh-huh, and picking you up.
Daddy.
2 planes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack.
What is that, a part of some drill?
Ain't no drill.
19 men attacked our country. The 12 of you will be the first ones to fight back.
How do you love your family and leave them to go to war?
I have 2 hours. I'll be really quick.
Not a chance. Holding out is the only way I can guarantee you come back to me.
War's gonna be over in like a week.
I don't care how long you're gone, as long as you come back.
Every step we take is gonna be on a minefield from 100 different wars.
Odds are we're not all gonna make it out of this one.
If we don't take that city, World Trade Center is just the beginning.
We're teaming up with the general of the Northern Alliance that we know nothing about. General, you show me exactly where we're going.
Over the mountains. We take horses.
All right, who's ridden before? Anyone?
Summer camp when I was 9.
Spring break, but I was pretty hammered.
Does it have a name? The name.
Great, this will be fun. We're outnumbered. 50,000 Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters. We're on our own. I can't order anyone to do this.
Do you want to surrender?
Keep your finger on the trigger.
Stay there.
Oh, God.
Well, I won't back down.
There's no playbook here. We're gonna have to write it ourselves.
No, I won't back down.
I ain't losing one man on this team.
You could stand me up at the gates of hell, but I won't back down.
We're fighting with horsemen against tanks.
Hey,
The greatest weapon in history is this.
there ain't no easy way out.
If you die, that's a letter you and your wife are gonna wish you wrote.
I made her a promise. I'm coming home.
Won't back down.
12 Strong, the declassified true story of the Horse Soldiers.
Well, thank you for watching. That was kind of a treat to watch it on a larger screen. And thank you for being here tonight and listening.